What's up, guys? I'm Chad Barnes, and welcome to the channel. Here, it's all about real car talk, from simple fixes to smart driving tips and keeping your ride in top shape. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button, and make sure you watch all the way through. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's get to it.
It seems that the installation of hydrocompensators is such a positive process that there will be no turning back. However, no. They are not everywhere, and it seems that they have no place in modern engines. Why is this the case? Because there must be silence. As you know, thermal valve clearances exist to compensate for the thermal expansion of the metal when it heats up. That is why, by the way, adjust the clearances on a completely cooled motor. On a hot engine these clearances simply do not exist, on a warm engine they do, but less than on a cold one. We are talking about hundredths of a millimeter, so compliance with technology when adjusting clearances is very important. Adjustment can be different. Somewhere it is enough to insert a feeler gauge between the tappet and camshaft cam and turn two nuts with wrenches, somewhere after measuring the clearances it is necessary to select new tappets or adjusting washers. The first way is the easiest, but adjustment on this principle is usually required more often than more expensive and complicated selection of washers or tappets. In general, either the clearance had to be adjusted quite often, or it was not too cheap. I wanted to come up with some system that would get rid of this procedure forever. And that's when hydrocompensators appeared. Their design is not too complicated. Inside the housing there is a plunger, a piston with a check valve, usually a simple metal ball, and a return spring that pushes the plunger. The principle of operation of the hydraulic is also not the most complicated. When the camshaft cam is turned away from it, that is, does not press on it, the spring pushes out the plunger and the cavity under it is filled with oil. Oil intake goes on as long as the plunger moves, i.e., until the gap between the camshaft cam and the hydrocompensator disappears. As soon as the clearance is selected, the ball locks the valve. At this point, the compensator is unable to compress and the cam of the shaft begins to push the valve stem through it. The processes are repeated with each revolution of the camshaft. This is the simplest scheme. It happens, of course, that the hydraulics change the place of their position. In lower shaft motors, the hydrocompensators stand under the levers and rocker arms and work in the position upside down. Camshaft cams push them from below. For us it is exotic in some sense. The overwhelming majority of cars on our roads are driven with motors in which camshafts are on top. However, it does not change the essence, and the principle of operation of all compensators is the same. It seems simple, but what an effect! To be more exact, several effects. The most noticeable and important for the car owner is a noticeably quieter engine operation. Indeed, hydrocompensators can almost completely destroy the main source of noise under the valve cover, thermal valve clearances. No matter how hard engineers try, but the clearances still change over time, which leads to an increase in noise from under the valve cover. And in any case, there are these gaps and therefore there is noise. The second advantage of hydrocompensators is their ability to adjust to the natural wear of some parts. That is, they themselves choose the unnecessary gap formed over time in the mechanism. And it also leads to noise reduction and also to some positive influence on timing life. For example, camshaft cams do not wear so quickly with them if, of course, hydrocompensators are serviceable, not jammed. And the last thing is that there is no need to regularly check the thermal clearances of valves and their periodic adjustment. The hydrocompensators successfully cope with it themselves. There seem to be a lot of pluses. Unfortunately, there are minuses too. The best part is the missing part. Although there are undoubtedly benefits from expansion joints, along with these benefits come some difficulties. No matter how you look at it, the working body of the hydraulic compensators is oil. And if something goes wrong with it, they will not work. And that's where it gets tricky. Low pressure do not work, clogged channels of the cylinder head do not work, low quality or old oil do not work. Even a missed oil level will result in an unpleasant noise in the cylinder head. By the way, there is a story associated with oil and hydrocompensators that illustrates the situation. Ford Zetecki motors, which were used in the first Ford Escort and Ford Mondeo, had hydrocompensators. But with the appearance of the first generation of Focuses, where these same motors stood, the hydrocompensators were taken out of them and tappets were put in, and even without adjusting washers, although on European focuses they were. Why? Yes, because in the USA these focuses cost pennies, okay, cents, they were bought by a lot of people, and the service was treated accordingly to the American mentality and own status, a little something. And hydrocompensators in engines in which oil was not changed for 30 to 40,000 kilometers did not want to live. So the quality of oil for cars with these parts is not an empty sound. The second point is the presence of a simple mechanism inside the hydride. Over time, it wears out, moving parts run worse, the valve ball gets stuck, there are gaps not provided by the design, the plunger spring changes its characteristics. In this case, it either jams or does not lock the oil inside. Both are bad. In the first case it rapidly eats camshaft cams, in the second case it starts knocking and also kills the camshaft, and in the most neglected cases it cannot move the valve normally, gradually disconnecting the cylinder. And another disadvantage of motors with hydrocompensators is increased noise immediately after starting the engine. In the first seconds it is hard for them to be filled with thick oil, and at the moment of this transitional process immediately after the start they can rattle. However, if they are in good working order and there are no problems with oil quality and pressure, the noise quickly goes away. How to check? Here it will be very short and sad. It is possible to check hydraulics qualitatively only after their removal. You can, of course, listen to the engine better with a stethoscope and check if there is a suspicious knocking sound under the valve cover above one of the cylinders. If the sound is clearly localized, the probability of hydrocompensator failure is very high. However, there are many questions: whether it knocks because of wear or lack of oil pressure, in what condition are the oil channels of the cylinder head, whether there is no wear of the camshaft cam, and if there is, then for what reason this wear began. And in the end you will have to take out the hydrides anyway. Further, everything is much simpler. The hydrocompensator filled with oil should not be compressed, the empty one should be compressed. If the empty hydraulic does not compress, it is jammed. If it compresses full, the plunger mechanism is worn out. Sometimes compensators are repaired, disassembled, well washed, then reassemble. Depending on the peculiarities of the design of the hydraulic, not all of them are well amenable to disassembly, and most importantly, assembly. This operation can lead to success. But more often it is still necessary to buy new hydrocompensators. I don't think any of the readers will want to change them with their own hands. It's quite a hassle, though not very difficult, so I won't dwell on this issue. But I will note that your humble servant on an 8-valve engine changed them right in the yard, although sometimes he allowed himself a little profanity. But let's not talk about sad things and move to a more interesting question: why many people think that the era of hydraulics ends. Faster, higher and lower. It is premature to say that hydrocompensators will soon be completely gone. Nevertheless, there is such a trend. And the same ecology is to blame for this, strange as it may seem. What systems we are accustomed to see in the most efficient, and, therefore, environmentally friendly motors. First of all, a system for changing the valve lift height. Of course, almost all of them already have phase change systems, but the most simple and popular systems with hydraulic phase shifters are not hindered by the presence of hydraulics. But for valve lift systems, it sometimes interferes significantly. And, by and large, hydrocompensators are not always needed there. So why make the motor more complicated and expensive? The second factor is the presence of inertia. No matter how fast the hydrides work, they need time to gather and release oil. Therefore, in some engines, especially those with high speed, they are not favored at all. For example, in Honda engines, where they disappeared in the first place on motors with VTEC system. The system is already complex, so it is easier to return to the regulation valve adjustment every 40,000. There are other factors. If the Jigguli could turn the valves every 20,000, modern technology allows you to make this operation necessary once in 90,000. And since the average warranty on the motor in our country is no more than 150,000, it makes no sense to get involved with hydraulics. Noise. It is not terrible. Engine compartments, unlike arches, now try to soundproof more or less qualitatively. And the last thing is the inevitable growth of the cost of a motor with hydraulics. Even the most budget cars with inline 4s are now 16-valve, so such a motor will be noticeably more expensive and heavier. And why, if it is measured at the factory only 150,000 mileage? It will be fine without unnecessary details. It turns out that in expensive motors, the valve train is already too expensive and complicated, and in inexpensive motors, you just don't want to put in hydrides. However, it does not mean that everyone will soon give up on them. Most likely, until internal combustion engines will not die under the onslaught of electric buzzers, in some part of them compensators will stand until the last. In conclusion, while hydrocompensators offer innovative solutions for various challenges, their effectiveness can often be overshadowed by the complexities of human emotions and relationships. Many individuals may feel disillusioned, leading them to abandon these tools in search of more tangible forms of support. Understanding the balance between technology and emotional well-being is crucial. As we navigate the intricacies of love and connection, it's essential to remember that while hydrocompensators can enhance our lives, they are not a substitute for the genuine human experiences that truly fulfill us.